On July 10, 2026, CNN reported findings from satellite imagery taken on June 21st, showing vehicles entering and exiting tunnels at a site in Iran's Zagros Mountains called Pickaxe Mountain. The imagery was captured while the June 17th Memorandum of Understanding between the United States and Iran was in effect. CNN approached both the Iranian and U.S. governments for comment. Iran's government did not respond to the specific finding. A Pentagon official said the U.S. would not discuss battlefield conditions or intelligence matters due to operational security. That Pentagon non-answer is itself the story, because the site in question, Pickaxe Mountain, has never been visited by IAEA inspectors. It has never been acknowledged by Iran as a nuclear facility. It was never targeted in either the June 2025 12-day war between the U.S., Israel, and Iran, or in the current round of fighting that began on February 28, 2026. The Institute for Science and International Security, a Washington-based research organization that has been monitoring Iran's nuclear sites using satellite imagery since before the war began, concluded that the MOU Trump signed at Versailles on June 17th explicitly requires Iran to maintain the status quo at nuclear-related facilities and should therefore prohibit ongoing construction work at Pickaxe Mountain. Iran is apparently doing that construction work anyway. The U.S. is apparently doing nothing about it. And the 60-day window in which a final agreement is supposed to be negotiated is running while the tunnels keep moving. Let me explain what Pickaxe Mountain actually is, because the site's history tells you everything about why its current activity matters, and why the non-response from Washington is not simply a case of America not knowing what is happening inside those tunnels. Construction at the mountain began in 2020. The timing is not coincidental. On July 2nd, 2020, an explosion destroyed an advanced centrifuge production plant at Natanz in a sabotage operation widely attributed to Israel. That attack eliminated Iran's most important facility for producing the centrifuges that enrich uranium. The loss was severe enough that Iran's entire centrifuge manufacturing timeline was set back by years. Iran's response, beginning almost immediately after the attack, was to start digging a new facility deep inside a mountain, one that would be physically immune to the kind of surface strike or precision sabotage that had repeatedly set back the declared nuclear program over the years. The decision to build inside a mountain rather than underground at a known location reflects a lesson Iran had been learning incrementally since at least 2002, when the existence of Natanz was first publicly revealed and accelerating through each subsequent attack on its nuclear infrastructure. The Fordo facility, Iran's second major enrichment site, was built into the side of a mountain near Qom, specifically to make it resistant to airstrikes. The U.S. government assessed that Fordo was too deeply buried for conventional bunker buster bombs to destroy. When Israel and the U.S. launched Operation Epic Fury on February 28, 2026, Fordo was targeted, but survived with limited damage because of its depth. Natanz, which had above-ground and near-surface components, suffered far more extensive damage. The pattern Iran took from that experience was the same lesson it had drawn from Fordo's comparative resilience. Go deeper, go further inside the mountain, make the tunnel complex harder to find and harder to destroy simultaneously. Pickaxe Mountain is the culmination of that architectural logic. The site sits just south of the Natanz nuclear complex in the Zagros Mountains. It is referred to in Persian as Kuh-e-Kolangazla. Unlike Natanz, Fordo, and Isfahan, the three declared sites at the center of Iran's acknowledged enrichment program, Pickaxe Mountain has never appeared in an IAEA inspection report because the IAEA has never been permitted to visit it. Iran has never acknowledged the site as a nuclear facility. Its specific purpose has never been externally confirmed. What is known from 6 years of satellite monitoring is that a large tunnel complex has been under sustained construction since the summer of 2020, that the tunnels run deep into the mountain, that vehicle access routes to the tunnel portals have been periodically sealed and reopened in patterns consistent with active construction rather than static storage, and that the site has never been struck in any military operation by any party, including during the February 2026 strikes that heavily damaged Natanz, Isfahan, and Fordo. The reason Pickaxe Mountain was never struck is also revealing. The U.S. and Israeli targeting of Iran's nuclear infrastructure in February 2026 focused on sites the intelligence community could confirm, held enrichment equipment, highly enriched uranium stockpiles, or nuclear weaponization research. Pickaxe Mountain held none of those things at confirmed locations, because no inspection had ever confirmed what it holds. You cannot target what you cannot verify. And Iran appears to have understood, when it chose Pickaxe Mountain as the site of its post-2020 underground construction project, that the absence of any inspection access would function as a kind of operational protection. A facility whose contents remain unknown to external verification cannot be included in a targeting package based on confirmed weapons program evidence. Spencer Ferragasso, a senior fellow at the Institute for Science and International Security, described this significance plainly. He wrote that, in his assessment, Pickaxe Mountain is an insurance policy by Iran in case negotiations fail, so it will already have a nuclear facility in an advanced stage of construction when those negotiations end, whether they end in agreement or in breakdown. That framing is analytically precise because it distinguishes between what the site appears to be and what Iran would need it for. The site is not, as of available satellite data, a functioning enrichment facility. It does not appear to be producing uranium. The centrifuges that would enable enrichment have not been installed at a confirmed location inside the mountain. But a facility built deep enough inside a mountain, progressively hardened against airstrikes with tunnel access partially sealed to prevent observation of its interior, is a facility that can become an enrichment site on a compressed timeline if Iran decides to leave the negotiating table and reconstitute the program it is publicly committed to dismantling. The activity visible in the June 21st imagery is specifically on roads leading to the western tunnel portals, which remain open to vehicle access. The eastern portals, by contrast, were partially blocked by earthen material as of April 22nd, shortly after the ceasefire took hold. The ISIS assessment describes this pattern as vehicles entering and exiting the western tunnels, indicating work inside the complex is continuing, while the eastern portion has been partially sealed, possibly around contents that Iran does not want to be accessible or observable. What is in the sealed portion of the tunnel complex is unknown to any external party. It could be empty space, it could be stored equipment, it could be enrichment-related material moved from one of the declared sites before or during the strikes. Nobody outside Iran can currently confirm which of those possibilities is accurate, because no inspector has ever been inside. The contrast with Iran's other nuclear sites makes the Pickaxe Mountain activity more significant, not less. At Natanz, the access roads to the underground enrichment halls have not been restored. The worker entrances remain destroyed. The vehicle entrances are still severely damaged from March 2026 strikes. Little activity is visible. At Isfahan, where the Institute assesses that more than half of Iran's stockpile of uranium enriched to 60% is believed to be hidden, the tunnel portals remain backfilled with dirt as of June 29th. No activity observed. At Fordow, the tunnel entrances are blocked with soil. The sites that were declared, acknowledged, targeted, and known to hold enriched uranium are largely inactive. The site that was never declared, never inspected, and never targeted is the one showing vehicle activity during the ceasefire. The ISIS report's overall conclusion is worth quoting precisely because it frames the situation with appropriate analytical restraint. The Institute found there is no evidence of any uranium enrichment and that the centrifuge program remains destroyed. But it also found that the need remains to verifiably dismantle or further disable Iran's remaining enrichment facilities, close Pickaxe Mountain and other underground sites, and remove or downblend the 10 tons of enriched uranium Iran is assessed to hold, including approximately 440 kilograms enriched to 60%. That stockpile is enough, with further enrichment, to fuel 10 to 15 nuclear weapons. It is bottled up in underground facilities where it cannot currently be accessed or verified. Now, let me address the question the title raises directly. Why does America have no response to this? The Pentagon's refusal to discuss the CNN finding is procedurally normal for intelligence-related findings. Governments do not routinely confirm satellite imagery analysis by outside research organizations through official spokespeople. That part is standard operating procedure. What is more revealing is the absence of any informal response, any anonymous briefing, any background statement from U.S. officials indicating that Washington is aware of the Pickaxe Mountain activity and views it as a concern. The 60-day negotiating window is active. Talks between the U.S. and Iran were expected to resume in Pakistan on July 11th, the day after CNN's report. The timing of a public response to Pickaxe Mountain satellite imagery, in the middle of a critical negotiating phase, carries costs that a deliberate non-response does not. Here is what a formal American response to the Pickaxe Mountain finding would require. It would require the U.S. to either call the activity a ceasefire violation, which would then logically require some enforcement action or threat, or acknowledge the activity without calling it a violation, which would signal that the MOU's status quo clause is unenforceable on an unacknowledged facility. Neither option is comfortable for a negotiating team trying to reach a final deal in 60 days. Calling it a violation creates a confrontation Iran will manage by denying the facility is nuclear, since Iran has never acknowledged Pickaxe Mountain as nuclear in the first place. Not calling it a violation acknowledges that Iran can conduct significant underground construction at a facility with potential nuclear purpose while the ceasefire holds, which is a very different MOU than the one Trump described when he said Iran had fully and completely agreed to nuclear inspections in perpetuity. The non-response is therefore not necessarily evidence of American weakness or American ignorance. It may be evidence of American calculation. The calculation being raising Pickaxe Mountain publicly during the negotiating window would force Iran to either stop the work and acknowledge the MOU covers it, which Iran may resist because doing so would mean acknowledging the facility as nuclear, or continue the work and trigger a confrontation that derails the broader deal, which serves neither side's economic interests at this moment. The deliberate silence buys time for the negotiations, without forcing a confrontation that could collapse the table. Whether that calculation is correct depends entirely on whether the negotiations actually produce an agreement that addresses Pickaxe Mountain before the 60-day window closes. Now let me give the counter-argument the honest treatment it deserves. ISIS itself was clear that there is no evidence of uranium enrichment at Pickaxe Mountain, and that the centrifuge program across all sites remains destroyed. Construction at an underground facility is not the same as nuclear weapons development. Tunnel hardening is not the same as centrifuge installation. Activity on access roads is not the same as enrichment. The facility may be exactly what Ferragasso called it, an insurance policy, a hedge being maintained in case talks fail, not an active program violating the ceasefire's nuclear terms. Iran may be calculating that building the capability to restart enrichment quickly without actually restarting it gives it negotiating leverage in the final deal, because the alternative, letting this facility sit idle while giving inspectors access to confirm what's inside, would remove that leverage permanently. That distinction between building capacity and exercising capacity is the line Iran appears to be walking. Whether the MOU's status quo clause prohibits that distinction is the legal and diplomatic question that the non-response leaves unanswered. There's also the context of what the MOU actually says on inspection. As covered in the previous analysis of the Trump-Iran contradiction, the MOU commits Iran to downblending under IAEA supervision, not to IAEA access to specific facilities. Iran has never accepted that Pickaxe Mountain falls under any IAEA agreement. If Iran's position is that Pickaxe Mountain is a defense installation rather than a nuclear facility, it can argue the status quo clause of the MOU does not apply to it. The absence of any inspection regime that definitively covers Pickaxe Mountain means Iran has the legal ambiguity to continue the work while technically claiming not to be in violation. Here is what to watch in the 2 weeks following the CNN report. Watch whether the resumption of talks in Pakistan on July 11th produces any public statement from either party about Pickaxe Mountain specifically. If U.S. negotiators raise the site at the table and Iran acknowledges it in any form, even to deny its nuclear character, that is a diplomatic contact with the facility that did not previously exist in any formal context. The IAEA has never inspected it. No negotiating document has named it. If it enters the formal record of U.S.-Iran talks for the first time as a result of the satellite imagery publication, that represents a shift in the legal and diplomatic status of the facility, regardless of what Iran says about its purpose. If neither side mentions it in any post-session readout or background briefing, the silence is being maintained deliberately by both parties, and both parties have assessed that raising it publicly would cost more than leaving it quiet. Watch whether the Institute for Science and International Security publishes additional satellite imagery updates in the coming weeks. The Institute has been publishing monitoring reports on Iran's nuclear sites since the ceasefire took hold. If the next report shows the Pickaxe Mountain Western tunnel portals have been sealed like the eastern ones were in April, Iran may have quietly responded to the public exposure by halting the visible portion of construction without any formal acknowledgement. That outcome, quiet compliance without admission, would be consistent with how Iran has managed international pressure on its nuclear program across multiple administrations and multiple inspection regimes. If activity continues or increases in the next imagery cycle, the insurance policy is still being built regardless of how many satellite images have been published about it. Watch whether any language specifically mentioning Pickaxe Mountain or the requirement for IAEA access to undeclared sites appears in the public readout from the Pakistan talks or in any leaked element of the draft final agreement framework. The MOU was silent on undeclared sites because neither party wanted to create a confrontation over a facility whose nuclear character neither side could formally acknowledge during a ceasefire negotiation. A final agreement that is also silent on undeclared sites would leave Iran's most strategically important potential reconstitution location permanently outside any verification framework. That outcome would mean the agreement verifies what was declared and leaves what was never declared to continue developing without oversight. Here is the honest version of what the Pickaxe Mountain satellite imagery tells us and what it does not. It tells us that Iran has maintained continuous construction activity at an uninspected underground facility throughout the ceasefire period, in apparent tension with the MOU's status quo clause. It tells us the facility has been under progressive development since 2020 and has never been inspected by the IAEA. It tells us that while Iran's declared enrichment sites are largely inactive and damaged, the one site the international community has never formally examined is the one still showing vehicle traffic. What it does not tell us is that Iran is actively enriching uranium or building weapons. The centrifuge program is destroyed. There is no enrichment evidence. Pickaxe Mountain is being built toward a capability, not exercising one. The distinction matters for assessing what Iran is actually doing during this ceasefire and what the non-response from Washington actually means. America's silence on Pickaxe Mountain is not evidence that it does not know about the site. It is evidence that it has calculated for now that silence serves the negotiating table better than confrontation. Whether that calculation survives a final deal that fails to address Pickaxe Mountain is the question the next 30 days will begin to answer. I will see you in the next one.